We really need to take students to different wine regions so they can understand it. Like, you can't understand Burgundy from a book. You can't understand Bordeaux from a book. Let's take you there. Let's spend a week with you and let's show you when we're talking about aspect and we're talking about exposition and different soil types depending on elevation. Once you've seen it in Burgundy, you will remember that for the rest of your life.
Sit back and grab a glass. It's Wine Talks with Paul Kay.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul Kay, and we are at an away game way up in the Napa Valley, about to have a conversation with Christian Oggenfuss, the CEO and co-founder of the Napa Valley Wine Academy. Here to talk to Christian about the Napa Valley Wine Academy. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
We've been trying this for a long time.
We have, yeah. You've been traveling, I've been traveling, so. Well,
you were just in Paris, and we were talking about via one of the networks that, boy, we would live there.
We sure would. Who wouldn't want to live in Paris?
Every time I go, I leave kicking and screaming, and my wife's like, "What's wrong with you?" I'm like, "This is great." Yeah. What were you doing there this time around?
Well, we ended a trip in Paris. We took a group of students to Burgundy for a week. So we do wine education travel to different regions throughout the world, and I was lucky enough to lead 14 students through Burgundy.
Wow. Okay, let's talk about that. The Napa Valley Wine Academy. Classic name for, probably the academics of wine, but how did this get started that you created this school for wine academia, basically?
Yeah, so we started back in 2011. My business partner, Catherine, and I, we were instructing for another school that was in San Francisco doing WSET classes, and it was around the time that Copia had actually gone bankrupt, and they were offering WSET classes at Copia. We had graduated from the WSET at Copia. And so we were teaching for this other school and kind of dissatisfied with how the students were being treated and how the school was being run. So off the cuff, I said, "Hey, Catherine, I think we could do this better." And she said, "Yeah, sounds okay." She kind of thought I was kidding. And we met up a couple of weeks later, and I said, I think I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna start a school and apply to become a WSET provider. And I said, "Are you in or not?" And she said, "You're kind of crazy, but yeah, let's do it." We both had full-time jobs, so we started as a kind of as a weekend gig to fill in what we saw as a hole in the market or an opportunity.
Was that because there would be spillover? Copia, by the way, for the listeners, wasn't that Julia Child's old school, or what?
Yeah, it was a nonprofit founded by Julia Childs and Robert Mondavi, the Mondavi family.
Right.
Yeah.
A beautiful facility next to Oxbow.
Yeah.
And now home of the
CIA.
CIA, right?
Yeah.
The second campus.
Yeah.
Wow. So they're offering WSET, and for the listeners, the Wine Spirits Education Trust, which is one of the, I think, what did you say, the three main education avenues for students of wine?
Yeah, it's probably the one that sees the most amount of students in the world. So it's up there with the Court of Masters, and then it is the WSET is also a feeder to the Institute of Masters of Wine.
Oh, it is
as well. Yeah.
No wonder they didn't accept me. So apparently I didn't read the instructions on how to answer the questions. Well, this is interesting because it was recently actually on the retail side of things when I was buying wine that it became a minimum standard for many wholesale groups in Los Angeles anyway to have some kind of WSET education, whether it's level 1 or 2, whatever it was, so that at least when somebody walked into a sales call, that's an important thing. I remember one of the big brands that are gone now, Wine Warehouse, bought by InBev. But she walked in, she had never sold a thing in her life. And she comes to an account that was doing who knows how many millions of years, hundreds of thousands of dollars with the Wine Warehouse without knowing a thing. And so I thought that was a pretty noble or aggressive thing to do, to make a student go to WSET school to learn something. You see a lot of sort of wholesale groups come through here, like, I want to go sell wine, so I'm going to.
Yeah. So, we see about 80% of the students we see are somehow involved in the wine trade, right? So we see people who self-fund their education, who are looking to advance their career, but we also work with large corporate clients. We've done work with Southern Wines and Spirits, RNDC, Young's Market, when they were still Young's Market. We work with Albertsons. We work with a lot of large corporate accounts to train their either frontline staff, right, who are selling wines at the retail level, but also folks who are, portfolio managers or district managers or, guys on the street carrying the bag.
That's the key.
Yeah.
So if I'm interested in wine. Like I took this group to Bordeaux. You just got back from Burgundy. I took some clients / friends / relatives to Bordeaux. And they were really fascinated by the whole concept, having not had that opportunity before. But let's say they wanted to start learning about wine. What would be your suggestion to them?
Yeah, so it's funny. So we offer the WSET suite of courses: wine, spirits, beer, sake. And then we've also developed courses for those wine enthusiasts who don't want the formal education. So we have our Wine 101 course, which is an online course. Yeah. We have a Wine 201 course as well. That gives people, if you know nothing about wine, the Wine 101 course is great. If you want to know more about the world of wine, the 201 is great. So that's less formal education, but giving you the knowledge and the tools to explore the exciting world of wine. We see a lot of enthusiasts, though, actually take the WSET track, right? They want the certificate, they want the validation, and it's a really great program. And it's very well organized. The materials are very well presented, and then it just has that cachet, right?
Have a listen to a show just released on the Bottle Shock the Game. Yes, that's right. From the producers of the movie Bottle Shock comes the game. I'm not sure how to explain it. It sounds like a ton of fun. No wine experience needed. Sort of like What's My Line meets Clue, and a fascinating conversation with those folks. It's and there's a lot about the movie too, the backstory of the movie. Conversations with Jim Barrett, Bo Barrett, and the gang. And because we're on the Bottle Shock story, let's have a listen to Steven Spurrier's episode about 2-3 years ago, just before his passing. We had a chance to catch up via Zoom on this incredible conversation about how the Judgment of Paris got started in his tenure in the wine business. I don't know, we call him the godfather of wine, but a fabulous conversation. Have a listen to that. Well, you see a lot on LinkedIn, like, the guy's name or the girl's name, and then W said 2, 3, diploma. So the highest level is 1, 2, 3, and then the highest level is diploma.
Diploma, that's correct.
And if I'm going to start, what would you say the average tenure to take the test? Let's say I haven't passed the test yet, but how long does it take to get to the test?
The diploma, or
diploma.
Yeah. So diploma is a 2-year program, right?
It's pretty intense.
It is. It's a combination of structured learning, right? So presentations in class or online, and then a lot of self-directed learning with materials. So you get all the materials that you need to study to prepare for the exam. But there are different units. There are 6 different units that you need to complete to get your actual diploma. So the D1, which is all about winemaking, right? D2 is about wine business. D3 is about the world of wine. And then D4 and D5 are fortified and sparkling, and then D6 is a research paper. So once you've passed all those elements, you get your diploma, right? And you graduate from the WSET with your level. And so diploma.
The prestige of that diploma is pretty high.
It is. I mean, it's you're signing up for 2 years of really intense studying and rigorous exams, both tasting and theory exams, and those graduates go on to high level positions in organizations, right? They're brand managers, portfolio managers. Some are winery owners. Some are journalists. A lot of them aspire to be masters of wine. So their next move is to apply for the Institute of Masters of Wine. So yeah, these are high level folks in the wine business.
When I sold the company last year, I thought I'm going to act. I'm going to be an actor.
Right on.
This is always the creative process that I've been wanting to do, at least voice act anyway.
Yeah.
And so I studied and I looked for classes, and there's one in Santa Monica. It's called the Meisner Method. It's very structured, but it was 2 days a week, 3-hour classes, and for 2 years.
Yeah.
And I'm just having a hard time, convincing my wife this is a good idea to leave the house for. In Santa Monica is not close to my home.
Yeah.
But then I was doing some acting the other day with some friends, and she said it took her 2 years, but those 2 days were just a tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
The home study.
Yeah.
And the home practice.
Yeah.
Was many, many hours.
Absolutely.
And so when you get to the end and you take the diploma test, what's your passage rate? Like if I really was diligent, do I have a 50% chance of passing, 100% chance?
Yeah, so the global average, I don't have it off the top of my head. I think it's around the high 40s, low 50s.
50% chance, or half the time you're not gonna. You got to take it again.
Yeah, so it's you're passing several different exams, and so the passage rate of one unit might be higher than the other unit.
Yes.
We're very lucky. We had this year we see about 40 to 50. Students per year or per cohort, and we run 3 cohorts per year of the diploma program. The latest cohort that just graduated in April, which went through the graduation ceremony in London at Guildhall. So we had 28 graduates.
Wow.
So yeah, these are folks like you said, right? It's not just the opening the book and reading a chapter a night. It's really making it part of your daily routine, tasting a lot of wines, studying things, keeping up on current events, forming study groups, right? So we see those students that engage in that manner passing, and those that don't failing. And the interesting thing is we see them. The folks that pass typically pass with merit or distinction.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense,
right? So they pass at a very high level,
right?
And the ones that don't, they fail out.
That kind of ties into this hospitality side of this business as well as restaurant touring. My daughter's a French-trained boulanger, and that really with the romanticism and the structure of wine. You have to have a ton of passion to do both. In other words, you want to open a restaurant, be a chef. I mean, if you don't have the drive, which has really come from some internal passion to do this, I can see why that would happen.
Yeah, yeah.
That some people, it's almost impossible to exist in this world without some degree of drive to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's not just a passive sidekick thing.
I kind of liken
too much
it.
To learn.
I liken it to being a performance or a professional athlete, right? You're not kind of a professional athlete. You're either a professional athlete or you're not. And if you're going to be a professional athlete, you're putting in the time, and you're working through the pain and the tough parts. And I think that applies to anyone that's successful in business. Restaurant, right? That is an unforgiving business. You have to have the drive, the passion to succeed. And I think the wine education and the wine business is no different. It's a very competitive. Very competitive.
Well, it's competitive out there to get jobs and to do the work. And I think I made this note when I sent you an email that I used to go to dinners in Vegas. I'm talking 15 years ago. Southern Wines and Spirits aren't Young's back then, and Regal, and we get these long tables with all these people, and these guys are getting 6 digits. They get their degrees. Back then it was probably the Master Somm or the MW, and then they get these giant, high-paying jobs. And that doesn't play out so easily anymore. The role has changed. The role inside a restaurant has changed. You're sometimes the GM and the wine buyer because there's just not as much to go around. Do you see that happening?
Absolutely. I mean, COVID changed a lot, right? So I think there was still those high-flying times before COVID, especially for sommeliers. The restaurant industry, as everyone knows, was hit very hard during COVID, and where do you look to save? A lot of people saved on their wine program, right? So wine drinking at home was up. Wine drinking at restaurants has been on a nice steady decline for some time. So those jobs didn't bounce back, and like you said, they were given off over to other folks. Like, hey, you're the manager. You're now the wine buyer. You're doing the wine list. So I think those times are definitely changing.
There's a restaurant in Manhattan Beach called the Arthur J. Probably one of the most exquisite wine lists, thought-out wine lists. Very heavy duty. I mean, there must be a few hundred bottles available to the consumer. and they had a wine buyer. And now the GM does it, and he's like, look, not only for the listeners, does a wine list require curation, thought process, understanding what the meals are and the dishes are, but also what your clientele wants. You have to think about the number of vendors you're going to have to use, like how many checks you're going to have to write, and how many different accounts you have to write them from. And so it becomes an ominous thing to dump onto a GM who's also worried about making sure the dishes are clean, to throw the wine at them as well. So what do most people do when they graduate? They feel confident about what they've got, but
so we our students, most of them, I say, aren't involved in the restaurant business, right?
Really?
They're not coming to us to become sommeliers. I mean, some are,
right.
Sure, but for that, there's the Court of Master Sommeliers who will train you for those positions. We see a lot of folks who have entrepreneurial ambitions in the wine business, right? They want to open their wine bar, they want to open their wine shop, they want to start importing wine, they want to start distributing wine.
Have you had? Do you have a psychiatric evaluation when it comes to the WSET?
Yeah, again, it's the entrepreneurial spirit is high. Or then we have folks that are looking to advance in the wine business, right? So we see a lot of those folks, and then, like I said, right, we have large corporate clients who put their students through. Or their employees through our programs to upskill them.
Right. I talk about all the time the how tough this business is, and particularly on the wine manufacturing side. You want the old adage about you want to make a small fortune in the wine business kind of thing, but it's true. I mean, it's the margins suck, and the competition's high, and a lot has happened in this industry. And when I started with my father in 1988, and he had started the business in '72, there was true value in finding overstock wines, how Trader Joe's got started, right?
Yeah.
They really would tell you, I got 2,000 bottles of this amazing Cabernet, and it's the end of it.
Yeah.
And that's the Wine of the Month Club did, virtually through the mail.
Yeah.
But that changed a lot in the late 90s, early 2000s, where the idea of a private label came, and they're bringing this really crappy things from the middle of Spain, putting it in fancy bottles and calling it wine. And that changed the narrative of what wine is.
Yeah.
And it also changed sort of the way people, the consumers, looked at wine.
Yeah.
There's a big movement, at least I've seen it online. It kind of bothers me. We wrote about it a little bit, which is changing the language of wine. And I went back and looked at some Les Amis de Vin magazines, which is a really great magazine from the 70s.
Yeah.
See what Michael Broadbent was saying, Harry Waugh, those guys.
Yeah.
It wasn't dramatically different, but it was a little less granular than when we talk about wine today. When we talk about leather and some of the language that people will say, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yep.
What do you think? Does that evolve over time, and does it change generationally? And how do you guys at WSET make this sort of standardized?
Yeah. So I think from an educational perspective and from the WSET perspective, it's agreeing that we are, it's really reaching a consensus with students that we have to agree on a common language, right? So that when we are communicating with each other, when we're evaluating wines, when we're writing our tasting notes, that we're using a consistent language, and that language is evolving at the WSET level too, right? There are terms that used to be used that are no longer used, colors and things like slowly, right? Not fast. I think probably at the speed of which Webster's amends the English language. So that commonality of language is really important. So that systematic approach to tasting. I think when we look at the broader language of wine, it definitely has evolved, right? I think in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we might have used some language that was, by today's standards, not politically correct, right? Mm-hmm. Calling a wine feminine, or that's true. Like a ballerina in a summer dress standing on her tiptoes. We probably wouldn't use those terms today, and that's fine, right? Language has been evolving over thousands and millions of years. So it is adapting in that sense. I think language, the language of wine is a fluid thing when it comes to generations as well. Like my daughters talk about wine completely different, right?
Yeah.
And consumers talk about wine completely different than a wine student. A wine student is breaking it down into its components, and its acidity, into its aroma characteristics, into its balance. You know, when you want to talk to a consumer and get them excited about wine, you're not going to use WSET language, to be honest with you, right? You're going to use emotional language and poetic language. Wow, this wine it's got some nerve to it. It's got, it makes me feel racy, or it's quenching, right? You're using these emotive words because you're excited about the wine, and the person listening to you might say, "Wow, that sounds really exciting. Let me try it."
Yeah,
so I think
point.
That's. We talked a little bit before the mic was hot about this trend to simplify wine and make wine approachable to everyone, and wine should be approachable to everyone. But how we talk about wine, you can't take wine is a complex thing, right? You not only have thousands of grape varieties, you have hundreds of different regions those thousands of grape varieties can be grown in. You have thousands of winemakers who impart their special touch into the winemaking process. You have yeasts, you have climate. So it is complex. And this notion that, hey, we can simplify that is kind of silly. And it would be like saying, hey, the art world, let's take Matisse or Van Gogh or Monet and let's simplify it, right?
Yeah.
Let's you can't do it, right? You'd be losing something and missing something. So I feel very passionate about that wine is by its very nature complex, and this notion that, hey, we're just going to simplify it I think is wrong.
You wonder why the influencers, which is another pet peeve of mine, all hang their hat on the idea that we're going to simplify it. When you and I, like you just said, are constantly learning.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, new regions come on board regularly, or the old regions are being modified.
Yeah.
Or Burgundy's, changing the way they canopy because of climate change, and so that changes the character of the wine, and we have all these things to think about. And so I wonder if, and I've said this before, and I don't say it derogatorily, but I say it like, I wonder if we don't self-propagate the aristocracy of wine by having these language. And we need a language. We need to say to each other, yes, just let's take a simple case, a corked wine, the nose of a corked wine. That should be fairly obvious to most of us. Yeah. But some people may just smell it and say it's off, and not know why, and say, I've had waiters say, no, it's not. Right? Yeah. Literally say that to me.
Yeah.
But it seems that sometimes it's not a deliberate point, but that we do self-propagate what civilization might say is the aristocracy of wine. Would you agree with that or no?
Yeah. Again, I see it as, that which is complex sometimes can feel exclusionary, right?
Right.
So
that's a good point.
Medical science is complex, and there is a language around medical science that if you're not familiar with that language, you might say, well, that's excluding me.
I'm not sure my doctor's familiar with that language.
Yeah,
no kidding.
So I don't know that you could simplify it, right?
Yeah,
like, and as far as, folks who say they want to simplify wine, I think there's, I'm sure you've heard of this, the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? That is, a little bit about something, and now you think you're an expert, and you talk with authority about something that you really don't know much about.
Yeah.
And then once you actually know something about a subject, you realize that you need to be a little bit more humble, and you potentially don't know everything about it, right? So, and I see, we've seen that in just observing students who come for level 1 class, right? Their first entree into wine education, and they sit for 6 hours, and we tell them the basics of wine, and they then say, "Wow, I know so much now. Thank you so much," right? And
that's true. And
then they walk away, and the opposite happens at level 3 in diploma, right? They're learning, and they're like, holy cow, I thought I knew a lot, but there is so much more to learn. I still, after finishing diploma and why some people go on to the Masters of Wine program, right? They realize that there's still so much to learn. So I guess just reinforcing that notion that it is a complex subject. And exclusionary language, I mean, there definitely has been exclusionary language, right? There has been dismissing someone who doesn't speak your language, I think makes it exclusionary. I think if you are if you encounter someone and you're speaking this highfalutin wine language or at a level that someone isn't understanding, and you take a moment, you're like, okay, I'm dealing with someone who might not know what that is. So now let me, with my vast knowledge, let me bring it down to a level that they might understand. And then that is how you make wine more inclusive, but it's not by making it simple, right? So corked wine is corked wine. And if I tell you this wine is corked, you're like, oh, yeah, right. I agree with you. It's TCA, probably blah, 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 and we can talk about that. And someone sitting next to you might be like, what's corked wine?
Yeah,
and you might say, wow, this is a brilliant opportunity to impart a little bit of knowledge. Like, okay, if you smell it and it smells musty or like wet cardboard, that's corked wine. And they're like, oh, really? How does that happen? Well, sometimes that happens, for these myriad of reasons. And when you encounter that, it's okay to send it back. And they'll say, geez, thank you. Now, that was making an inclusive discussion. Sure. If that person in a different scenario said, what's corked wine? And you're like, well, if you know, right?
It's TCA.
Yeah, it's clearly TCA, right? And kind of dismissive like that. So, yeah.
There's a certain humility to that when you do as much around it every day like we are. Humility to know when you're speaking to somebody, what level that you need to speak to.
Sure.
And also when to keep your mouth shut to learn something yourself.
Yeah.
Because like you went to Burgundy, I went to Bordeaux. I'm sure you learned something new in Burgundy that you didn't know before. And so you have to keep your mouth shut and not act like you know it all. And even more important, because I think almost every conversation, this is what I love about wine, almost every dinner conversation I go to, whether it's my brother-in-law or with friends, wine is always part of the conversation. And I bite my tongue to make sure that I keep it at the level and don't intimidate anybody. Not that I would anyway, but that the conversation can move on without any intimidation, without somebody shutting down because they didn't understand what we were talking about. And that's so important because we want people to learn. And it's kind of interesting, too, because the group I took to Bordeaux, they're going to hear this, and they're going to give me grief about it, but their cellars are mostly Napa cabs. Okay, because that's what we're used to, and that's L.A. But, boy, did we get, educated in Bordeaux and learn character structure of a Bordeaux versus a California wine, and came back all lovers of these vintages that we tasted. And it was eye-opening for everybody to be there. How important for your students, like you could read all the books in your thing, the books they stacked up, and you still, until you smell it and touch it and walk it, don't understand it necessarily.
Oh, it's so important. I mean, when we started out, we always knew, hey, we're here in Napa Valley. We would be silly if we forced everyone to sit in a classroom in the Napa Valley to learn about wine without, we have a classroom that's outside these four walls, right? So we developed the WSCT Level 3 boot camp, right? And we said, hey, if you're studying at this advanced level, let's take you out. Let's show you how wine is made during harvest. Let's get you involved in harvesting the grape. Let's get you involved in inoculating, the fermentation. So that's been really fun, and that's a program we've been running now for 9 years, and is highly successful. And we always have a waiting list for folks to join that program. And then we took it a step further. In 2018, we said, we really need to take students to different wine regions so they can understand it. Like, you can't understand Burgundy from a book. You can't understand Bordeaux from a book. So let's take you there. Let's spend a week with you, and let's show you, the region. When we're talking about aspect and we're talking about exposition and different soil types depending on elevation. Once you've seen it in Burgundy, you will remember that for the rest of your life, right? So I think that's really important, and that's something we feel very passionate about. We took students on 9 trips this year.
Wow,
we'll take
great.
students on 9 trips next year, and it is always such an aha moment.
Yeah.
And even, I've been lucky enough to go on most of these trips. I've been to Burgundy. I grew up in Switzerland. We went to Burgundy as a child a lot, so I've been there a lot. But like we just said a moment ago, every time you go, you learn something new. So the opportunity to learn on the ground is really important. Yeah.
This there's a marketing problem going on. I got out, I wouldn't say in the nick of time, because I was suffering through the congestion of the wine world, and I just had a conversation with Angelica at Donham Estate this morning, and that is and I think it applies to learning, because wine is so experiential, and I think that the industry needs to, and the end is going back to the days of my father's career here, and that was having dinners, Les Amis Devant, having Robert Mondavi speak at the thing, having Robert Bowser, having Harry Wacom, and they would stand up and they would speak, and the women would dress up and the men would wear their tuxes, and they would come and experience something about wine. Mm-hmm. When we have this internet issue where people are getting barraged, I had 4 ads this morning, 12 bottles for $60. And you know that by the nature of wine, going back to what I said of the overstock situation, it can't be any good. I mean, once in a while, but for the most part, if you're buying wine for 50 cents a liter in Valencia, Spain, it's just not going to be very good.
Right.
So the experience of not only a consumer coming to Napa or going to Bordeaux or Burgundy and saying, wow, and remembering that experience, the students had that same experiential value.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
They'll never forget that.
Look, wine is a social beverage. It always has been.
Yeah.
We've tried to turn it into a commodity. We've tried to turn it into a luxury product. But it's about an experience,
Yeah.
right? And I always say 90% of what makes a wine exciting happens outside the bottle, right? If the wine is good, that's good. The other 90% is who you're with, where you are, the mood you're in.
Right.
So it's a very, there's pomp and there's a certain level of pomp and circumstance around a wine. There doesn't need to be, right? You can go to Aldi in Germany and buy a Tetra Pak 1 liter of wine, and there doesn't need to be pomp and circumstance around that. But there's something that wine brings to a social situation or a meal that makes it exciting, and it's a social lubricant too, right? Great discussions start around a bottle of wine. Whatever those discussions might
I
be.
like that term, social lubricant.
It loosens lips. Hopefully, it doesn't sink ships.
Yeah.
But it's fun, right? To me, it's a combination of fun. It's a combination of it's an artistic thing. It's a scientific thing, and it's an educational thing. There's an opportunity around all those elements.
The social lubricant thing was very interesting, and I've said this 1,000 times to customers that were putting on a wedding, and the wedding budget always gets bashed in the wine section.
Yeah.
And so we went to a big event the other night, and it's an Armenian-based event, and there's some really super Armenian wines. I've got a few of my favorites. I think are world-class, terroir-driven expressions of what can come out of there, and they're finally hitting the marketplace. And they poured, and it was undrinkable. Both of them, they read it, literally undrinkable, and they didn't drink it. And I thought to myself, again, and this isn't a wedding, but I mean, certainly at a wedding, cut back on the band or cut back on the valet guys.
Yeah.
And add this social lubricant to your table to make people have fun.
Yeah.
Not come away and go, oh my God, could you drink that? I didn't drink it. Are you kidding? It was terrible. Like we went to a wedding once and it was the Aldi, somebody was pouring Aldi Blind Owl. I think the reason they call it Blind Owl, it makes you go blind if you drink it. So do you talk about the business of wine in the WSET?
Not as much the business of wine. So it's all about the you do it at the diploma level.
Yes.
Business is an important aspect of it. On the other side, it's about winemaking. It's about regions. It's about wine styles, right? So it's more product focus and region focused. We do have a course called the Business of Wine that teaches you everything you need to know about everything from growing grapes to turning it into a bottle of wine to retailing it. I think that's an important thing. You touch on something important. Wine education up to this point has been very focused on giving you the theoretical knowledge about wine or teaching you how to taste wine. I think skill building is the next frontier for wine education. If you're really going to be successful, and that is okay. We have someone who comes and says, "Yeah, I want to get into the wine business. I want to start a wine shop." Okay, well, guess what? You're going to need to know more than just about what we teach in the WSET. You're going to need to know how to read a P&L. You're going to need to know vendor negotiations. You're going to need to know pricing and markups. You're going to need, on and on and on and on. You're going to need to know some HR because you're going to hire some people. So we are working on developing those skill-based courses for our students, right? The first one we're launching is how to be a wine educator, right? Most people say one of their dreams is, I want to get this certification, then I want to teach about wine.
Yeah.
Well, having knowledge doesn't make you a great teacher. I've experienced some very knowledgeable people in my life who were miserable teachers.
Yes.
Being a great wine educator means that you need to be able to adapt your level of how you talk, your language, to the right audience. You need to be inclusive to that audience. You need to be able to adapt to different learning modalities. You need to be able to be a confident public speaker, and so forth. So, we're very excited about building programs to develop these skills.
Well, this is my favorite thing to tell people after 17 million bottles that we sold in our company. that game has changed radically in not only the last 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. My last full year in the business was 2022, and I sent 33 million emails.
Wow.
And only 4 million were automatically generated by the email service provider. Yeah. And that was completely and absolutely necessary to do. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. The podcast sort of started because of that. It wasn't for business, really. It was because I was hearing so many great stories on Tasting Day every Tuesday that I thought this is silly to let them go by and just sit down and talk about it. But the marketing of wine has changed radically, even in the last few years.
Oh, yeah.
And it's you realize it's almost not about the wine anymore. But you got to start with something that's really palatable, that somebody can drink, and that you think that your customers are going to like. But to get the message to them is crazy complicated these days.
Yeah.
And not so much so, and I don't think I've ever said this to the listeners, my wife and I were just going to lock the doors after 35 years, March 31st last year. Just thanks for the run. It was great. We had a great time.
Yeah.
But somebody stepped up and folded it into another group, and I watch what they do, and it's really complicated.
It is.
It's really complicated, and there's a lot of wine writers out there now. If you go on LinkedIn and we're at wine writer, you're going to get thousands of entries. And did you see Asimov's New York Times article a couple days ago?
I did not.
The value of a glass of wine?
No.
It's kind of like what we were just talking about. It's really about what's in that glass, that moment that you sip that wine and you're with your friends, and that the term, like I love, social lubricant starts.
Yeah.
It's such an important part of what we do, and really the basis. Right? All the rest of it's fluff. And all that to say, I get a lot of people in my office on the podcast and selling that are trying to come up with something new, innovative, something unusual. So they're bringing funny glass-shaped 375s to the table and saying, this is full of premium wine when it's not. Cans. I had the Cornell professor who's responsible for changing the lining in the cans so that wine would last longer.
Yeah.
Tetra Paks. We talk about that stuff. What the bag in the box. What's the WSET's situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, absolutely. Alternative packaging. We discussed that in the diploma, right? And wine is, as you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, so fast evolving. It's evolving at a faster and faster pace. To those statements that people are changing packaging and bottle shapes and to gain attention and putting inexpensive wine in that. I think that's where education can be a real tool for the enthusiasts too, right? So they can tell and identify when someone's trying to pull their wool over their eyes.
That's a really good point.
And you know, to your comment earlier that you know, at their wedding where they, you know, in the absence of knowing much about wine and you taste it and you're like, this is bad or this is good, and I don't know why that red Cabernet was bad and that red Cabernet was good, right? Yes. And with education you can tell, well, okay, well that Cabernet
good point.
You know what I mean, came from a region that doesn't, you know, that Cabernet, I'm going to make an absurd example. I don't know if it exists or not, but that Cabernet came from the Mosel. Well, who grows Cabernet in the Mosel? No wonder didn't meet my expectations. And that Cabernet I had is from, you know, from Tokelon in Oakville. And
yeah, right.
So I think that's where education can become a real tool to help the consumer avoid those mistakes.
That's a really funny and an important distinction you just made, because I would get stuff in the office once in a while and I'd go, wait a minute, what? This grape there? And they go, yeah, isn't that weird? And I'm like, yeah, that's really weird. You know, like Cabernet from New Zealand, we used to see those, and it was actually pretty good because from a dairy part of the state that had different soil characteristics.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. But I think, not that the W said doesn't do this, but it's so complicated to market wine, and the margins are so bad. And I think I encourage you to read that article about Asimov, because it basically says, look, I'm going to defend what's in the bottle. Mm-hmm. Because what's in that bottle is important. Mm-hmm. And all the periphery stuff that we have to go through. Like I had an influencer on the show not too long ago. She didn't know anything. Mm. But because she has 120,000 Instagram followers, she gets paid.
Yeah.
Right? But really didn't know that much.
Yeah.
It's really frustrating.
You know, I think that's a dangerous thing. And maybe dangerous is hyperbole, but it's an unfortunate thing,
yes.
Right? When you have someone with a pulpit who has 100,000 followers and they're not informed, we know how that goes, right? Yeah. It's that misinformation gets out, it gets repeated, it gets validity, even though it's false or partially incorrect. And I think that does the wine world some damage, right? And I think it does any industry damage, right? When someone has a megaphone and a lot of followers and they're not up on what they're talking about, that's dangerous.
And they get paid for it. That's the part. Maybe it's a personal thing.
Yeah.
And I want to get paid for it too. But
so I think as in every facet of life, you know, you make the easy choice. Sometime you're going to pay the piper, right? You're going to have a hard life, right? You make the hard choice in the beginning, you're going to have an easy life. And what I mean by that is choose who you have talking about your wines carefully.
Yeah,
right.
That's a really good point, too.
Because it might not give you exposure. I think we're chasing in the wine industry. Oftentimes we chase the wrong things.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We're almost out of time,
okay.
But I did want to touch on one subject, and it's a very important subject. I came up here, I don't know, maybe it's 2 months ago for the Association of African American Vintners tasting.
Yeah.
And
great organization,
fabulous time and fabulous wines. And I had reached out to them, I don't know, probably 2008 or something. There was some social thing that was going on, and I wanted to feature an African American wine in my club.
Yeah.
And there were like 5 members.
Yep.
And none of them made enough to cover my needs to what I was doing.
Yep.
And now there's like 200 members, and there's some fabulous wines.
Yep.
Not the least of which was, if I get a hold of your hat on this one, a canned Method Champenois.
Okay.
So figure that one out.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how you just gorged that.
I don't know either. Yeah. With a pull tab? I don't know.
Yeah, it was crazy. But it was really actually quite good.
Yeah.
But part of the narrative there is and I think part of it ties into not the exclusionary, but the aristocracy of the wine industry, and trying to get a foothold in the industry, and they're doing it. But even women in wine is another huge subject. Mm-hmm. So a political value to and there's moves being made, but I always try to figure out how that happened. I mean, and maybe it's too hard a question to figure out, but how along the way did wine become sort of exclusionary? Because I think it was, and that there's attempts now to make it inclusionary and understand the value of all winemakers.
Yeah.
Do you have any sense on that? It's what might have happened, or just natural?
I think there. Yeah, I think we saw during COVID, right? We saw some of the things happen racially around the U.S., which really started to raise the conversation about Black Lives Matter, and I think that caused some introspection in the wine business, right? And also the wine business being called out and said, "Hey, what are you guys doing?
That's true.
What are you guys doing?" And turns out there wasn't much that the wine industry was doing in that regard, and we became very passionate about it as an organization. And friend of mine, Mary Margaret McCamick, who's a master of wine, gave me a call one day during the pandemic and said, "Hey, we're thinking about forming a nonprofit organization to help give opportunities to African Americans and people of color in the wine business," and that became Wine Unify. And I said, "Hey, we are all in. You tell us what you need. We'll give you, we'll sponsor classes, and we've been working with them ever since. And every year we do that. We had Wine Access with Josh.
And Josh?
Yeah, Josh Hart.
Oh, Josh Hart,
yeah.
Right.
And so we donated classes to that. We worked with the Roots Fund. We also did a scholarship program with the African American Vintners as well. And we work with Pink Boots Society. So we are all about the scholarship. We're all about giving those opportunities. Interesting about women in wine, the metrics, and we look at the metrics quite a bit of who's enrolled in our classes and who's viewing our classes from a demographic standpoint. And turns out 56% of our enrollees are women, right?
Wow.
So they outnumber men.
That's great from the academic side. That's excellent.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think the wine world is changing. It's always historically changed at a very slow rate, right? From a technology perspective, from an inclusionary perspective, from an environmental perspective as well. But I like what I'm seeing in the diversity element.
It's a slow industry. We only get one chance a year to make something of it, and all the other time in between is waiting for the grapes to grow.
Hey, you're a farmer. At the end of the day, you're farming.
Yeah,
right. So
I had an intern whose job it was to write talking points for the show, the ones I didn't send you, and I had her sit in all the women that came in, all the winemakers and marketeers, and she ended up loving it. She's now at Cornell getting her enology degree.
Awesome. And
I'm very proud of having been part of that sort of inspiration.
Yeah.
Wasn't trying to put it to her, but she loved what she heard. And I think that's great because you and I know this. There's nothing like this industry.
It's not really.
If you can get through the slow part and the tenure to get there to understand it, there's nothing like it. And I think you just saw that at Burgundy. I mean, at Bordeaux, there's like a fraternity. It was crazy good what reception was given to us. There was what's funny, an anecdote that I didn't mention, and that was when we were talking about people's education. And I was at a party the other night, and this complete novice of wines, we were talking about wine, and we were talking about Cheval Blanc since we had gone there, and the wines were $1,500. And he goes, "Would you ever serve one of those to me?" I go, "No, I wouldn't." And he's like, "Why not?" I go, "Because you'd only be impressed with the fact that it was $1,000, and that's not good enough." So I had a winemaker in from the Pyrenees, Roque des Anges, and he was over not too long ago, and I opened a bottle of Liege-Baz. Because he would understand it. He would appreciate it. And hopefully I inspired the guy to go, okay, I want to be one of those guys too. Right? Anyway. Awesome conversation. I hope we could do it again.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for having me on.
We didn't cover a lot of ground, but we're going to cover it next time.
Yeah, sounds good.
And good luck with what you're doing. I think this is fabulous. I'd love to sit in, one of these days.
Yeah, we'd love to have you
sit
in.
what's going on, because
Absolutely.
Mine was a school of hard knocks.
Yeah.
You know, standing
Hey,
there.
that's important too, right? You learn a lot on.
Anyway, thanks again. Cheers.
Yeah, you bet. Cheers.